Lisa Copeland, and I want to invite you to my show, The Big Sell. Are you ready to stop being a small player in a big world? Are you ready to decommoditize your business? Are you ready to stand aside from the competition? Join me every week on The Big Sell. Hi, everybody. It's Lisa Copeland, and welcome to another episode of the Art of the Big Sell podcast, where I only bring to you big sellers, people who have big ideas and build big movements in life. And today's no different. I want to introduce you to my guest, Josh Evans. Josh, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Well, you are so high energy. Tell me about yourself.
Well, I wake up this way. And the funny thing is many times most people don't, including my wife. And so I haven't even started making coffee yet. And she's like, you need to slow down until I get at least a cup or two in me. So that's kind of how I approach every single day, every sort of situation. But yeah, this is me naturally. I have a lot of energy, if only because I'm very excited about what I do. Otherwise I don't do it.
Right.
And that's essentially, yes. And that's essentially where I started my entire career, is just being passionate about the things that I sold, leading up to starting my own business, which it's impossible to not be passionate about your own business. Otherwise you won't be in business.
Oh, absolutely. So it's almost like you've got a supernatural passion. Have you been that way your whole life?
I have. And I don't know if it's because of naivete or just because I want to put that much energy towards something, but I find it hard to slow down, especially if I find myself leading to or being led towards something. I want to sprint full out, because why would I half-heartedly approach something? I think there's a lot of people out there that keep their cards close to their vest nowadays, or they don't necessarily want to put themselves out there for fear of being rejected or fear of failure or fear of being hurt, whether it's emotionally or economically.
Right.
And those are the sorts of things that hold people back. Whether you're selling, $400 million worth of subsea pipeline, or you're selling somebody your book, like a single book for $14.95 or whatever it might be, you have to be confident in what you're doing, and you have to run towards it. Otherwise, people are going to look at you as if you're hiding something, I think.
All right. Well, tell us about you. Tell us about your career and how you started in sales. And I want to know more about you.
I'm going to start at the very beginning. When I was, we're going to go way back. We're going back to when I was just barely a teenager. I used to sell anything I could get my hands on up and down my parents' street. I made homemade dish soap that I would sell to my neighbors. We made bug repellent that didn't really work. And, I can look back now and actually admit that. But at the time, I was like, no, it's phenomenal. And then I remember I was pretty young. I think I was around 12 or 13. I got in trouble because I was trying to sell timeshares in my parents' backyard. And I didn't know what timeshares were at the time. All I knew was like, hey, you know what we can do? If we set up some tents in my parents' backyard, we can go out and get money and let people use the tents for a few days out of every year. And I had never even
heard of the world did you come up with that idea?
I was very entrepreneurial from a young age, and I would sell this stuff up and down. I'd get donations of materials. I'd get donations of money. And my parents stopped me one day, and they pulled me aside. You cannot sell timeshares to our yard. But I've always been that kind of a person where I see opportunity and I sprint towards it. And there's very little slowing me down. And it really translated into me wanting to study communications, because my goal is to be able to communicate effectively with anybody I speak to. I come off very enthusiastic and almost overbearing in a lot of the way in which I communicate. So I always wanted to know how to communicate more effectively. And so I studied communications through school. And then when I got out, I absolutely went into sales, because that's my natural bent, is helping provide solutions to people. And my first job out of college was working in Houston, Texas in August, where it's about 98 degrees plus and 100% humidity and a suit
it's
tie.
hotter, my friend, than 98 degrees in August. I'd say like 198, but maybe like 109.
It can get into it's in the low hundreds for sure. I'm just trying to be nice to my own city, because it's still my home city.
Right.
But yeah, so it'll be 102 and it's still ridiculously humid, and I'm wearing a suit and tie outside going door to door to businesses trying to sell credit card processing services.
Oh, and, that's a tough sell, because everybody's already got it.
They do. It's so, I got kicked out of so many places. Like there's places like now, like I'll hesitate to go in now as a consumer to certain restaurants and stuff, because I remember them like throwing chairs at me. And no, the thing is it taught me tenacity, being able to walk into a place and not fear rejection, but to kind of run towards it. And that's where I'm at now. And I absolutely love that sort of thing. And that dovetailed into selling technology for about 12 years in the oil and gas space. And I absolutely love doing that, if only because I was still providing a solution, but at a much higher price point, which is nice because the commissions are bigger.
I was about to say higher price point, higher commission. We know how that works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the neat things from that is I got into an argument one time with one of my coworkers. And so I carry around technical assets because I'm not a smart guy. I'm just a passionate guy. And so I can get in there and I can have the conversations, but I want somebody that knows the real details if we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty. And so we had a conversation, a meeting with one of my clients one time. Actually, they weren't a client yet, but we started having these conversations. And the original conversation started out talking about, okay, it's about $150,000 software deal that we were talking about, which is pretty good, right? That would have been nice for my quarter. And then I just start asking more questions and I start wanting to understand more about his business. And as we start diving in, I find out they have 13 offices with the exact same problem. And so I take this $150,000 problem or solution and turn it into about $1.5 million.
Yeah, I was trying to do the math in my head.
Well, I had to give them a discount if they're going to buy 13 or I'll throw in the last couple. But just having the conversation and having the tenacity and the gumption to go after it, right? That confidence, people, they respect that. And so we walk out of there and I'm elated because I'm the sales guy and no, they haven't signed the check yet. We haven't delivered anything yet, but I'm already spending it in my head, right? I'm like, I'm going to get the new sailboat.
Which is all good salespeople do. You spend your money, baby, before you even have it in the bank account.
It is gone already in my head.
That's what motivates us.
I'm cash operated, but with a good cause, right? And as I'm walking out of there, the guy that's with me, my technical resource, he's just rubbing his eyes and like pulling his hair. He's like, how on earth can you tell him we can do that? I was like, well, we can, right? He's like, it's going to take so much work. He's like, this is terrible. It's like, how is this terrible? He's like, Josh,
made a big sale and it was terrible?
I know. I was like, how on earth are you this despondent about the whole situation? He's like, well, it's going to be a lot of work. I was like, that's what they pay us for. What is wrong with you?
That's why, Josh, he's a technical guy.
Absolutely.
And a sales guy.
That's why we collect the big checks.
That's right.
And they sit in their dark cubicle.
Right. And the whole time he's just thinking, oh my God, I just had to do 13 times the work for the same hourly pay. And this guy's going to go out and buy a sailboat.
Absolutely. And I did. But all that to the side to say that night I got home and I was just frustrated. How can somebody be so dispassionate in something that they're literally collecting money to go do that? Yeah, go do it. If you don't like it, then find something more fulfilling. Absolutely, you should do that. But don't complain about doing the work that you're paid to do. And so I got home that night and I had a couple of scotches by myself and I started writing a book. And I ended up writing my first book, which is on why you should be passionate and enthusiastic about your work. And when that became a bestseller, I quit my 9-to-5 job and said, this is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to help people reclaim their passion, because it's not day one that people get upset, right? Day one, everybody's excited. It's day 500 where they're like, I just want to burn this place to the ground.
Right.
And so that's what I do now is I help organizations and sales team go through this process to remember why they should be passionate, how they can instill that passion in every single customer they interact with. And it's phenomenal. This is now the most fulfilling work I've ever done.
Okay, so Josh, throw some clues out to us. Some of our listeners and our viewers, they've been in the same job for 10 years, it's the same thing day in, day out. They hate their boss. They're living in a cubicle. They're on the phone all day long trying to sell some commodity. How do they restore their passion?
Well, and it doesn't, at that point, it doesn't necessarily just come from money, right? You actually have to care, because if you're just doing a set amount of work for a certain amount of money, there's nothing that's going to keep you from leaving that job to do the same amount of work for a little bit more money, right? And so if you want to be a mercenary, that's one thing, but you're never going to enjoy your job. What you need to remember is that anytime you're selling something, you're literally serving somebody else. I think having that adds a lot more depth to what you're doing. If I remember that I'm providing some sort of meaning to the clients that I'm working with, I care a lot more about making that sale and about explaining it better. I'm not just trying to get their check. I'm not just trying to get their credit card. Well, that's noble in itself. If I can remember I'm serving the people that I'm working with, it makes me never, ever question the amount of work that I'm doing. And I think that's a big key. A lot of people lose that because you get caught up in the having to do expense reports. You get caught up having to do all these processes and all these rules and regulations and having to or worry about, okay, whose territory is this? Oh, I don't want to, get into that person's, backyard. And we have these sort of discussions, and all the nuances, right? These policies and these restrictions that we place on our salespeople start to kind of squelch out that fire that they had when they started, right? Because the second you start telling them to throttle back, you're giving them permission to throttle back, right?
Right.
That's where I think a lot of sales organizations, especially in smaller sales teams, start running into those sorts of problems. And you see people just start to accept complacency.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the things that I talk to organizations about is that, do you believe that what you do matters? Because if you don't fundamentally believe that what you do matters, or if you're a purpose-driven either organization, sales team, boss, leader, whatever it may be, to your point, you're just there every day spinning your wheels, and then I think a lot of those people, Josh, do become mercenaries. They think, you know what, if this is all there is, I'm going to go for all the money in the world that I can get doing this same job, selling
Absolutely.
the widget. And if I can go down the street and sell widgets and make 20% more because it's the same old job, it's the same old grind, versus an employee who says, you know what, I believe in my company. I know that what I do matters, what my company does matter. And, I think that they're willing to stay put a lot longer. It's huge for employee retention.
You're very right. I mean, and turnover is a big problem, especially with good sales staff, because if they're really good, well, they do. They just accept it, don't they? The organizations, they know that there's going to be some certain amount of turnover. The problem is I think a lot of organizations, you have a couple of really good employees, right? And they're doing great. And you praise them, you pay them well, right? You bonus them out, right? They might hit accelerators. You love them. And then all of a sudden, without any warning, they go, hey, just so you know, I'm going across the street.
Yeah.
You're like, well, what happened? What happened is because you spend so much time treating them like a mercenary, you can't get mad when another dictator pays them a little bit more money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's because the organization is not of a higher purpose. It's just an organization. They're selling widgets, and that creates the mercenary mindset, which
Absolutely.
we'll talk about quite a bit. Yeah, no, I love that. So tell us about the book that you wrote.
So the book itself, let's go here. I have a copy right here. The book is called, absolutely, Enthusiastic You. And it really is just, there's some simple stories. It's a really quick read, but it's to help people remember why they were passionate and excited in the first place, and to create kind of an environment, or at least a personal space to where you can reclaim that. And we know that not everybody's going to have a phenomenal workplace, right, where you walk in and it's like big glass open spaces and you have a view. No, a lot of times you're going to have these places where you are in a cubicle kind of environment, or you're in a bullpen kind of environment, and it's not always easy, but there's things that you can do to kind of overcome other people's attitudes. Because we know, especially in sales, if somebody has a negative attitude in the desk next to you, it's going to affect you. And so
I would hate to have an inside sales job, like where I would have to sit at a desk and sell. And, both of my kids have one. One of my kids is with a Fortune 5, and another one's with a startup that's very, very successful. She's crushing it, in fact. But they're inside on the phone all day long. And it's like, for me, how are people successful doing that? Like, for me, I need the energy of other people, the customer in front of me. But I know the majority of sales positions in the world today are inside sales. You're in a cubicle on the phone. How do you ignite the fire and keep the passion?
Well, see, that's a good question. I've had inside sales jobs, and to be honest with you, it's very difficult to keep your energy levels up. Especially, it's the same environment. And I feed off of human interaction and personal interaction. And as you know, because you're in sales as well, you know that it's really valuable to read somebody's body language. You know exactly what they're thinking. And on the phone, we've really taken a lot of that out. And especially a lot of the inside sales roles now, the vast majority of it is done by email.
I know.
You've even lost the tone. That's a huge problem, right? I hate selling.
By email, Josh, how do you build a rapport? I mean,
it's impossible.
Yeah, it's just, I couldn't imagine.
Well, and one of the things I've found in this, we all do email marketing campaigns. We all do reach out through email when you can't get a hold of somebody by the phone or have an in-person conversation. But I've always found that if you can find a client that really values you, they'll introduce you to other people. And that's the only way I've found email to be really valuable, is if I can get an introduction and some sort of a testimonial or endorsement from somebody that others respect. And when you can go that route, it's transferred credibility. Yeah, I love that. Transferred credibility is a huge thing, if I can get that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what kind of companies, Josh, do you work with? Like, do you have a certain sector or vertical that you specialize in?
I tried to do vertical. I was working for a long time with a lot of hospitality organizations. And then last year I had
perfect, though.
Oh yeah, they're great because they need more enthusiasm, right? They need more passion.
Big time.
And then I was working a lot with healthcare, because it dovetails perfectly. Instead of talking about guest experience, you're talking about patient experience. It's easy. But then the interesting thing is, I keep getting brought up and speaking at these conferences. When people hire me to come speak at these conferences, I have all walks of life. I have huge law firms hiring me. I have chemical companies. I had a company, they do radioactive material remediation. And they were one of my biggest clients this past year. And so
tell me that you wore a hazmat suit when you walked in there. I mean, something.
It's an interesting thing because you walk in and they have to like run you against like Homeland Security to make sure you're not like some kind of weird individual because they have radioactive material on site. It was an odd couple of first months when we were first getting to know each other. But we worked with their sales team to revamp the entire thing, and then I've been working with their CEO, and now we've hosted a few retreats for their different offices, and they're phenomenally blowing and going with the sectors they've started to move into. It's interesting. And so while I tried to niche down to a single sector, but people keep pulling me in from other different directions. And so I'm enjoying it. So I can't complain, but it makes it hard to. But
I would think passion and excitement and the things that you teach, I would think that would work well over in any sector.
It does. But it makes it hard to plan my day. Because it fits everything, and that's the problem. It's the last thing you want to do is have to sell something that fits everybody, because then it's hard to come up with a message that fits that one somebody.
Well, because what they say in sales is that you have to have a niche to get rich. But in your particular case, it sounds like, because again, I think what you're selling, really a lot of it sounds like to me is you're selling mindset and helping people reprogram the negativity that they've probably had programmed for many, many years, and you really help take them down that road.
Absolutely. And there's a funny thing is because there's a bit of a disconnect between what the employees want or need and what the organizations are willing to pay for. And so what I found is when you're talking to the employees, you're saying, look, yes, I want you to be not only motivated and enthusiastic, I want you to enjoy your work. I want you to care about your work. But then when you talk to the organizations, right, and their HR teams or their COOs, it becomes more along the lines of, we want employee engagement, or we want higher productivity, and all.
We all. I mean, come
exactly. But if your employees care more, they're going to be more productive. And so when you can start aligning the individual's aspirations with the company's goals, and you show them how that works together, that's where it really fits in. And so I love doing that, if only because you start to see people's eyes open up and realize the potential for not only their organization, but for every one of their employees.
So what would you say the number one problem in the workforce is today that causes the negativity, that causes people to just be watching the clock and waiting to get home, waiting to leave?
That is a great question. So I would say, and this is my term, feel free to use it, just give me credit, company-sanctioned mediocrity.
Okay.
And the reason I think that what you tolerate is tantamount to what you endorse. So if you tolerate somebody showing up late, you're practically saying, well, it's okay. If you tolerate people not hitting their numbers or not making enough phone calls or having a bad attitude, if you tolerate that as you've given everybody else approval to act that same way. So it's your fault. And so I know I'm like an enthusiasm guy. I'm a passionate guy. But there are times when I go into organizations and we have to have really hard conversations. We're like, look, I just walked through your office and I know that 2 people you're going to have to fire in the next 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, so, it's hard to say that. But
how do people feel when you walk in? I mean, are they receptive in the beginning? Or I would think a lot of people operate in fear.
Oh, absolutely.
Not the people that hired you, of course, but the people that you're coming in to coach.
Well, and there's always this weird, like, kind of shifty, like, skepticism when you walk through, like, a bullpen or you walk through an office.
This happy guy coming through?
Who's this guy? And he keeps walking into our CEO's office, and he's meeting with the EVP.
Pointing fingers. And
yeah, like he looks through the blinds and then shuts them real quick.
Yeah, exactly.
I do that just to, I instill a little bit of fear, right? But just to mess with people. I'm not like that. I'm not that kind of a guy. But people definitely, they're standoffish, if only because you hear consultant, right? And you think Axeman, or you think change, and nobody's comfortable with change until it makes their checks bigger.
Right. Okay. So, so I asked you, what kind of problems does the company have, but what is some of the feedback that you hear from the employees? Like when you start really digging in, obviously they have their side of the story too.
Absolutely. Well, and so I think a lot of employees, they want to care. They want to be challenged in their role, but they've been conditioned to be mercenaries, right? They've been conditioned just to do the bare minimum to get the paycheck to run out the door at 5 p.m. or if their boss isn't there at 4 o'clock, right? And that's the mentality that brings us these sorts of lines like working for the weekends or, thank TGIF, right? Yeah. Those sorts of things.
Mondays suck. All of them, right?
Well, if Mondays suck, go do something else.
Right, exactly.
Life's too short to hate.
Let's go. We got a weekend. We need to make some money.
Yeah. When people talk about how they can't wait for the weekend or they hate Mondays, what they're saying is that 71.4% of their life, right? So 5 out of 7 days they hate. And if you've accepted that, you have a very simple job. If you've accepted that, then you deserve to not enjoy it, because it's really out of the individual. And so when people say, oh, it's hard for me to keep my passion, we can have a conversation about why they were excited in the first place. And if we can take all, and what it really boils down to is people are excited about the idea of the role, right? Because they're up above, they're 30,000 feet. And so when you get down on ground level and you're like, oh man, I got to fill out another friggin' report and I got to justify these expenses, and I only get 56.4 cents per mile when I drive to my clients. It's when they dive down into the minutia that people start to lose that vision of why it was so exciting in the first place.
So it sounds like it sounds like when people get the realization that they actually have to do the work, then they start to lose their passion. That scares me to death, but I know you're right.
Well, and I don't think it's necessarily about the realization that they have to do the work. I think people understand that they have to do the work. I think when people realize the details behind the work, right? 'Cause everybody wants to roll in and do a big sales pitch and walk out with a signed contract. Not everybody wants to do all the research on the front end, right? Or the 20 phone calls to get an appointment set with that client. Right. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the back end that you have to do that lead to that one shining moment. And if you don't remember why you're going after it, it's going to be hard to make that phone call every Monday, and then again on Wednesday, and then again on Friday, because sometimes he shows up at the office on Friday. It's that tenacity that a lot of people give themselves a pass to not have to have once they get a job.
So what do you think about companies like Google? That, they've been a client of mine in the past, and I go in there and I always take a picture of myself in the sleep pod and go over to the kitchen and eat lunch and play ping pong. Do you think those are more fulfilled employees with those kind of benefits, or is that just a millennial thing? What's your opinion?
I am a millennial, so I'm one of the oldest millennials out there. I'm at the cutoff, and it is not. You still have employees that hate their job at Google. They're rare. There's fewer, but you still have people that hate their job. Google does a very good job of reinvigorating people. They move people a lot between roles to keep things fresh. They spend time letting their employees choose what to do with their time. And doing those sorts of things really keeps people not only engaged, but it keeps their mind a little sharper than it would be if you just sit in this cubicle and only work on Google AdWords,
Josh, they are riding. I've been to Google Detroit and Google Austin. They're riding bikes around, they're playing ping pong. I've eaten in their cafeteria, literally walking by the sleep pod. They're sleeping. I'm just like, oh my God, how do they get anything done? But they obviously get stuff done.
They do. I think flexibility in one's work schedule to work the way you want to work is very valuable. There's some interesting places out there with a lot of different ideas. One of the coolest things I've seen recently is, are you familiar with what Zappos does to their new employees?
Yes, I'm very.
Where they offer them $2,000 to leave?
Yes.
Because I think that's a great idea. I think more organizations should do that. Offer people money to leave, because if they're just in it for the money, you don't want them in your organization anyway, because you're going to waste way more money trying to keep them on board, or way more money trying to keep them engaged, and you're going to lose. There's a huge opportunity cost to that. Yes. And so I think paying people to leave is a great idea.
Yeah, the co-author of Delivering Happiness, Jen Lim, she's a very good friend of mine, and she and I talked about that before, and I said they've actually upped it to $3,000.
Have they?
Yes. But I said, well, how do you know that people, how do they know? I guess it's Amazon now, but how do they know that people won't come on board just so they can get a check to walk out? She's like, no, that doesn't happen. I'm like, well, I would think it would.
Well, they have long, arduous interview processes, and what they found is the longer an interview process, the more likely you are to find the right candidate. And I think too often, especially conventional organizations and companies, the old guard, as I'll call them, right, non-tech, they want to put a rear end in a seat. That's what they need. They want somebody to fill a position. They don't want the right person. Yeah. They just want to fill a position. And when you do that, you're just asking for disengagement to come into your organization and infect the rest of your team.
Yeah, no, and that's very, very dangerous, to have a cancer on your team.
Absolutely. It spreads so quickly.
It does. It's terrible. It's deadly is what it is. I agree. All right, so Josh, as we wrap up, so tell me what your plans are for the future. What is it like? What does the next 2 years for Josh Evans look like?
Yeah, that's another really good one. You just got the fire questions coming at me. I love that question.
Ding, ding, ding. That's what I do.
I love it. So, and I've been thinking about this, right? And some of the things that I find most fulfilling in my work is when I can take leadership teams or executive teams and host these retreats. And so we usually go to some far off place, not that far off, but some place that's remote, away from their organization and away from the distractions, so we can really dive into what they're trying to build at their organizations. And since I love doing that so much, I'd love to host something a lot larger as an executive retreat, to where executives can come in to talk about their business, kind of leave all of the nuances behind in other people's hands, so they can really just think about how they want to build their organizations and their culture. And I'd love to do that on some sort of a Caribbean island. I think is going to be my goal.
Sign me up. That sounds fantastic.
I'll bring you out. Why don't you come out and speak to them? I think they'd love that.
No, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think people need that opportunity, executives, sales, whatever, just to get away, step away from the desk, and sometimes just fellowship with your coworkers at a different level.
Absolutely. I was with one of my really good clients from the past couple of years. We just had a big win for their organization, and they grew about 40% over the last year. And so me and their executive team and their sales team all went to, of all places, Birmingham, Alabama. We did about a half day of training of communications just to help them in their sales processes and to help their leadership really connect with them. And then that evening, we all went to an Eagles concert. So it just, those little things like that, just to build camaraderie and to understand everybody you work with is a human. And they all have knowledge that you can bring in. And doing these small little things can not only build a real team, not just somebody that's called a team, but really build a real team that cares about each other and will therefore care about the organization and where the organization is going.
I'll tell you, my daughter works for a software and services company out of Switzerland, and they just crushed it last year. So they took their entire global team to Amsterdam.
Nice.
Who takes millennials to Amsterdam? But okay. But took them all to Amsterdam, and I asked her when she got home, I said, tell me what the biggest takeaway was from your Amsterdam trip. Well, maybe not the biggest takeaway, but go ahead and just tell me from the team building standpoint, what was your Amsterdam experience? And she said, I got to meet my colleagues from all the different countries from around the world. And she said, it was just so cool because we're drinking beer, we're hanging out in Amsterdam. And it was just this whole vibe that now I know I can pick up the phone to my colleague in London or in Switzerland or whatever. And we're friends now. We connected on almost like neutral ground, right? Yeah. Somewhere that wasn't work related. And now we know each other. Now we're friends. Now we're hooked up. And, her sales have absolutely gone through the roof since she got back from Amsterdam.
That's awesome. It's that camaraderie. And I think too few organizations focus on that. And I think there's huge benefits to it. And so those are the types of things I love to do for organizations.
Yeah. So Amsterdam might be a good spot for you. You probably would not have a hard time getting people to go there.
That's true, but I might have a hard time for people to come for at least the half-day session at the beginning.
This is true. Well, you could reach out to our mutual friend Sharon Lecter. She's got a fantastic ranch in northern Arizona that I know a lot of executives would love to go to. Yes, there's hunting and fishing and horseback riding. I get up there every time I can. Well, Josh, awesome. What a great value that you bring to companies. How can our listeners, how can they work with you? How do they get a hold of you?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. You can check out my website if you want, and that's joshuamevans.com. You can hit me on any of the social medias at enthusiasticyou, YOU, or you can shoot me an email, info@joshuamevans.com. I'm happy to answer those or have one of my team answer them as well.
Well, that's great, everybody. I will put up all of Josh's contact information so that you can get a hold of him. Josh, continued success. Thank you so much for joining us on the Big Sell, the Art of the Big Sell podcast. And I know you're going to bring immense value to our listeners.
I appreciate that, Lisa. The honor was all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you.